Hello, everyone, and welcome to the How Do I Knit That podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Dawn of Sarah Dawn's Designs, and this 7th episode of the How Do I Knit That podcast will be talking about yarn weight and yarn fibers. So, what is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast came about because I hear so many people saying, "Oh, I could never knit that. Oh, I could never make that." And I think that's really sad. I'm a firm believer in the idea that anyone can knit or crochet or quilt or whatever your chosen art is. All it takes is some knowledge, the right tools, the right techniques, and the willingness to get a little ingenious. If you're looking for the previous podcast episodes, you can find them on my Patreon, which I will link to in the video description. With that said, let's jump right into a brief discussion of yarn weight. So let's start with yarn weight. What is yarn weight? Well, just to be super confusing, there's two things here. The first is the weight of the skein or ball of yarn, usually in 50 or 100 gram increments, or 8 ounces. That's important, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Though there may be a future podcast episode on why that's important, so let me know in the comments if you find that interesting. No, I'm here to talk about yarn weight, as in the diameter or width of the strand of yarn. The Craft Yarn Council has set standards for how to define yarn weight, using numbers 0 to 7 between lace and jumbo, with 0 being the smallest and 7 being the largest. These are the numbers you'll commonly see on ball bands and some patterns within North America. But these are not completely standardized. Ravelry.com, for example, uses a different classification system, running from cobweb/thread to super bulky. So how do you know what weight of yarn you have? Best way is that the yarn just tells you. Many yarns will label themselves as lace, worsted, or bulky right in the yarn names. Convenient! Just remember, these terms aren't standardized, so a yarn labeled an Aran could be considered a worsted or a bulky by the Craft Yarn Council guidelines. So, also look for the CYC, Craft Yarn Council, numbering system on the ball band as well. But not all yarns will do this, so then you'll need a bit more guidance. The most common way to classify your yarn is the number of stitches per 4 inches, 10 centimeters, in stocking stitch. So lace yarn gives a range of 33 to 40 stitches per 4 inches, while jumbo yarn has a range of 6 stitches or less per 4 inches. Or for the crocheters, lace is estimated at 32 to 40 double crochets per inch, while jumbo yarn is given as 6 single crochets or less. There's one huge caveat here though. Lace yarn in particular is often worked in lace patterns, where they are worked on larger hooks or needles to create a very lightweight and very open fabric. The other way you'll see of measuring yarn weight is a recommended needle or hook size. This is the size you'll often see on the ball band of a skein of yarn. These are the suggested needles or hooks that give the tension I mentioned before. If you're unfamiliar with the yarn you're using, this could be a good starting point when trying to determine the needle or hook size for your work. Another big caveat here though, oftentimes designers of knit or crochet patterns will specify a different needle than the ball band does. If that's the case, then the best thing to do is to look for the gauge specified in the pattern and use whatever needle or hook size you need to match that gauge. Now you might be wondering, why does all this matter? Because the thicker the yarn, the less stitches per inch you can get with it, and the denser the fabric is likely to be. If you want a thick squishy fabric, you're going to want to go with a heavier yarn weight. If you want a thinner drapier fabric, you'll want to go to a thinner yarn. Of course, this can be further altered by needle or hook size, so this is only a guideline. The designer's gauge is always the best place to start. Can you use a different weight of yarn? Yes, absolutely. There's 2 easy ways to approach this. The first is to work on an object where the chinked in gauge doesn't really matter. For example, a scarf written for fingering weight yarn will work just fine in worsted weight yarn, but the scarf will be wider and will need more yarn than the pattern calls for. Depending on the pattern, you may also have to choose a larger needle size as well. It will also look different. The fabric will be denser, thicker than the original. The other way to do this is to work with thinner yarn, but work with 2 or even 3 strands held together. 2 strands of fingering or sock yarn usually equal about a worsted weight, while 2 strands of worsted weight can equal bulky. If you want to get more complex, you can actually remath the pattern and gauge to match your yarn, but that's beyond the confines of this particular podcast. However, let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in learning more about that. And if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask me. You can leave any questions in the comments, and I'll do my best to help you out. Well, that wraps part 1. And as I head into part 2 of the podcast, I do want to say I really hope you're finding this podcast useful. I intend to talk about all sorts of knitting, crocheting, and crafting tricks so that you can create amazing things in whatever situation you're in. Remember, you can, in fact, knit that. And when I say knit that, I also mean crochet that or spin that. It applies to pretty much any craft I can think of. For the second part of the podcast, I'll be relying on you, my listeners, viewers, and audience. I want to hear what keeps you from knitting or crocheting, and I'll try and address the barriers you mentioned. It can be anything at all. I'll at least try and give you some advice. If you have trouble with a particular technique, are wondering how to knit with limited or no time, or can't find tools that work for you, please reach out and I'll try and address your concern on the podcast. I'll even do pattern support, provided the pattern is either free at the source online or one I can find at my local library. And of course, I'm able to answer questions about my own designs as well. I'll pull questions from the comments of this video and answer them on the podcast. Patrons can also submit an MP3 voice file or MP4 video file of their question over on Patreon, and I'll play that on the podcast. And now, on to part 2, various yarn fibers. So, in relation to yarn weights, there's also the various fibers that you can make yarn out of. The most common fibers are acrylic, wool, and cotton, so let's start there. Acrylic is easy to find in most parts of North America. It's a durable, hard-wearing fiber and comes easily in a wide variety of colors. It's machine washable and dryable, easy care, and virtually impossible to destroy. And if your memory of acrylic is a horrible, scratchy, awful fiber, think again. Acrylic has come a long way from the much maligned fiber that many of us remember. It does have a few drawbacks, though. First, it's a form of plastic. That means it's not naturally flame resistant and will actually melt at high temperatures. So any place where the risk of high heat or flames isn't suggested for acrylic. For example, it makes a poor trivet. It also sheds microfibers. Like all synthetic fibers, it sheds tiny plastic shards when you wash it. Most water treatment plants aren't equipped to remove these tiny plastics, so they're ending up in the world's waterways. This can be mitigated by using a filter that catches these fibers when you wash them, like a Guppy Friend bag, and I'll put a link in the description. And, because it's a form of plastic, the actual fibers don't decompose. So when that blanket has been worn to shreds, the plastic will persist in landfill far longer than a natural fiber like wool. Flipping that around, however, acrylics are very hard-wearing. I have sweaters that are older than I am that I can still wear. Wool, on the other hand, is a natural fiber. It's warm, naturally flame-resistant, biodegradable, and can still come in a variety of wonderful colors. It's a good wicking fiber, pulling moisture away from the skin, and can keep you warm even when wet. There's many different varieties of wool, and each type of wool is suited to one thing over another. Usually what you'll see is merino, BFL, blue-faced Leicester, or a more general wool blend. Merino is soft but felts easily, and unless it's superwashed will require more dental care when washing and drying. BFL is hard-wearing, and general wool blends tend to be a bit rougher on the skin. All wool should be washed carefully and not put in the dryer to avoid felting, unless it's been treated to be machine washable and dryable, or you actually intend to felt it. Oh, and let's debunk a myth here. Shearing sheep for wool does not harm them. In fact, it's necessary for the sheep. Sheep that are not shorn can have serious health problems and even die. This makes properly managed wool one of the most sustainable textile resources, with a new fleece grown each year. Wool also tends to be more expensive than acrylic, so if cost is an issue for you, then bear in mind that wool and other natural fibers generally run more expensive. In addition, there are folks out there with a wool allergy, so be aware that most charities that accept knit or crochet accessories will not accept things made with wool. Finally, be aware that some wool can come from sheep that have been mistreated. It's a good idea to check with the mill or the source of your yarn to see what, if anything, they do in regards to animal rights. The third common fiber at a glance is cotton. Cotton is a breathable, plant-based fiber great for summer knits, and it dyes up wonderfully. Good quality cotton is durable and long-lasting. Remember, denim is a form of cotton. And once the initial risk of shrinking is seen to, is easy care. Cotton's biggest downside as a yarn is that it has little to no natural elasticity, meaning that cotton socks, for example, are likely to sag around the ankles without something to create that elastic stretch. It can be nylon blended into the yarn, or that can be accomplished in how you knit or crochet. Cotton comes in a few different varieties, most usually related to fiber length. And you'll often see something called mercurized cotton, cotton that has been treated to have more luster using lye. This further straightens the cotton fibers and removes the outer fuzz, so the cotton seems to have a bit of shine. While yarn processed this way has no recognized health issues in and of itself, the resulting wastewater from this process is toxic, and so there is an environmental concern. Indeed, cotton, while a wonderful fiber, comes fraught with environmental and ethical concerns. Cotton takes a lot of pesticides and water as a crop, and is often grown and processed in areas of the world where labor protections aren't as strong. To deal with these issues, you can look for organic or GOTS certified cotton, which has protections for both pesticide use and labor protection. In addition to those fibers, there's a slew of other fibers: alpaca, silk, bamboo rayon, cashmere, tencel, civet, hemp, and more, and honestly, I could probably do an entire podcast on one specific fiber, so I'll try and summarize. Plant-based fibers such as hemp tend not to be as warm, while animal fibers such as alpaca and civet tend to be more insulating. Fibers that are smoother, such as silk and bamboo rayon, tend to have more drape compared to something like wool. Some fibers will stretch and grow as they're blocked and worn, alpaca for example, while others are far more likely to hold their shape. Again, if you've got a question on a specific fiber and want me to go into more depth, put it in the comments, I'd be happy to answer it. And on that reminder, I think that just about wraps up the podcast. A huge thanks to my patrons who supported this podcast. You folks can submit an MP3 audio or MP4 video file of your question over on Patreon. The podcast archive is available at my Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/SarahDawnsDesigns, and future episodes will be available here on YouTube as well. Patrons usually get access on the second Wednesday of every other month, and the podcast is available to the public a week after that, so the third Wednesday of every other month. Well, that's it for episode 7. Stay tuned in December for the next batch of techniques and questions, and thank you once again for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and remember, you can in fact knit that. Happy crafting!